Long ago, in a time when nations trembled and the world seemed to be unraveling, there lived a prophet whose voice echoed with a question many have asked, but few have dared to speak aloud. His name was Habakkuk. Unlike many prophets who delivered God's message to the people, Habakkuk did something different. He spoke directly to God, and he asked the questions that weighed heavily on his heart. Questions about injustice, questions about suffering, questions about evil, questions about why God sometimes seems silent while the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. Habakkuk's words are not merely prophecy. They are a conversation, a wrestling of the soul, a dialogue between human confusion and divine wisdom. Through this conversation, Habakkuk reveals something profound about faith. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is trusting God even when the answers are difficult to understand. And in the end, Habakkuk delivers one of the most powerful declarations in all of Scripture. The righteous shall live by faith. This ancient message has echoed through generations, influencing prophets, inspiring apostles, and shaping the faith of millions. Tonight, we step into the world of Habakkuk, a world where injustice seems to reign, where nations rise and fall, where a prophet stands on the watchtower waiting for God to answer, and where, in the midst of confusion, God speaks. The land of Judah was troubled. Violence filled the streets. Corruption infected the courts. Justice had become twisted. The wicked seemed to triumph while the righteous suffered. Violence filled the streets. Corruption infected the courts. Justice had become twisted. The wicked seemed to triumph while the righteous suffered. And Habakkuk could see it all, every act of cruelty, every dishonest judgment, every cry for justice that went unanswered. Day after day, the prophet watched his nation drift further into darkness. The law had grown powerless. Truth had become rare, and righteousness was mocked. So Habakkuk lifted his voice to heaven, not in quiet prayer, but in desperate protest. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear, or cry to you, violence, and you will not save? These were not polite religious words. They were the raw cries of a man who could not understand what he was seeing. Habakkuk continued, Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you look at wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise, so the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. The prophet's heart was heavy, because he believed in a just God, and yet the world before him seemed anything but just. The wicked surrounded the righteous. Justice had become distorted, and God seemed silent. Have you ever felt like Habakkuk? Have you ever looked at the world and wondered why evil seems to thrive, why corruption spreads, why the innocent suffer? Habakkuk dared to ask these questions, and in doing so he gave voice to the struggle of every generation. But something remarkable was about to happen. God was about to answer. The silence of heaven finally broke, and the Lord spoke. But the answer Habakkuk received was not what he expected. God said, Look among the nations and see. Wonder and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. Habakkuk listened carefully. What was this mysterious work God was doing? Surely it must be the restoration of justice. Surely God would remove the wicked and restore righteousness. But then the Lord revealed the truth. I am raising up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, a ruthless and terrifying empire. They were known across the ancient world for their cruelty. Their armies moved like storms across nations. Cities trembled when they approached. Their horses were swifter than leopards, their warriors fiercer than wolves. They laughed at kings. They mocked fortresses. They gathered captives like sand. And now God said he was raising up, using them, empowering them to bring judgment upon Judah. Habakkuk was stunned. How could this be? The Babylonians were far more wicked than Judah. How could a holy God use a violent empire to accomplish his purpose? The prophet struggled to comprehend, and once again he spoke. Habakkuk cried out again, "O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we shall not die. You have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for correction." Habakkuk acknowledged God's sovereignty, but he still could not understand. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil, why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Why do you remain silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? The prophet painted a picture. Humanity, he said, had become like fish in the sea, creatures without a ruler. And the Babylonians were fishermen. They caught nations with hooks. They dragged them in nets. They rejoiced over their conquest. They worshipped their own power. They sacrificed to their nets. And still they continued destroying nations without mercy. Habakkuk could not reconcile this with God's holiness, and so the prophet made a decision. He would wait. He would climb the watchtower, and he would listen. Habakkuk declared, "I will stand at my watchpost. I will station myself on the tower, and I will look out to see what he will say to me." The prophet became a watchman, not watching for armies, but watching for God's answer. There is a powerful lesson here. When confusion overwhelms us, when answers seem distant, the faithful response is not to abandon God. The faithful response is to wait for him. Habakkuk waited, and God spoke again. The Lord said, "Write the vision. Make it plain on tablets, so that a runner may read it." This message was important. It was meant to be recorded, proclaimed, shared, for the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie, though it seems slow. Wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And then came the verse that would echo throughout history, a declaration repeated by the Apostle Paul, the foundation of faith. The righteous shall live by faith. God had heard the prophet's questions. Now the Lord revealed the future. The empire of Babylon, mighty, terrifying, unstoppable, would not rule forever, though they conquered nations, though they crushed cities, though they believed their power was eternal. Their judgment was already written. And so the Lord pronounced 5 prophetic warnings, 5 declarations of justice, 5 woes, each one revealing that no empire built on violence can stand forever. The voice of the Lord declared, "Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. How long, O conqueror? How long will you gather wealth that does not belong to you? How long will you pile up stolen treasure?" Babylon had built its empire on plunder, gold from conquered cities, silver from broken nations, riches stripped from the defeated. But the Lord declared a reversal. Will not your debtors suddenly arise? Will they not wake and make you tremble? Those who had been robbed would rise again. Those who had been plundered would become plunderers. And Babylon would taste the same suffering it had inflicted upon others. Because this is the law written into the fabric of justice. Those who build their power through violence will one day face the consequences of their own actions. Then the second declaration echoed like thunder. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house. Babylon believed it had secured its future. Its leaders had built palaces of stone, fortresses on high mountains, cities surrounded by mighty walls. They believed their wealth had made them untouchable. But God saw what they had done. Their wealth was soaked in blood. Their luxury was built on suffering. And the Lord spoke again, You have devised shame for your house. The empire thought it was securing glory, but it had actually sealed its disgrace. Even the stones in their walls would testify against them. The beams of their palaces would cry out. The very buildings they had constructed would bear witness to their injustice. Nothing escapes the eyes of God. Then came the third woe. Woe to him who builds a city with blood. Babylon had built its greatness through violence. Cities destroyed, nations enslaved, lives crushed beneath marching armies. But the Lord asked a haunting question. Is it not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire? Empires rise, nations build, armies conquer, but when their foundations are wicked, everything they build eventually turns to ashes. The cities of the oppressors burn, the palaces crumble, the towers fall. Yet there is another vision God reveals, a vision that stands in contrast to the violence of empires. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. As the waters cover the sea, this is the future God is moving toward. Not domination, not cruelty, but a world filled with the knowledge of his glory. The fourth woe exposed another darkness. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. Babylon humiliated nations. They forced conquered peoples into shame and degradation. They celebrated the humiliation of others. But the Lord declared, You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Babylon had poured humiliation upon others. Now humiliation would return to them. The cup of judgment would come into their own hands, and the empire that once mocked nations would itself become a spectacle of disgrace. The forests they had destroyed, the animals they had slaughtered, the violence they had unleashed, all of it would return upon their heads, because injustice never disappears. It waits until the appointed time. Finally, the Lord spoke the fifth and final woe. Woe to him who says to wood, Awake. Babylon worshipped idols, statues of gold, figures carved from stone, images crafted by human hands. But what power did these idols truly have? Could they speak? Could they guide? Could they save? The Lord asked, What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A lifeless object, covered in gold, but empty within, silent, powerless. And yet people bowed before them, trusting in something that could not respond. Then the Lord declared a profound truth. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. In a world full of noise, where kings boast, where empires roar, where idols demand attention, God speaks a single command, silence. Because while nations rage, God still reigns. While armies march, God remains on his throne, and in his perfect time. Justice comes. Habakkuk heard these words, and something began to change inside him. The prophet, who once questioned God, now begins to pray, O Lord, I have heard the report of you, and your work, O Lord, do I fear. Habakkuk remembered the stories of old, the mighty acts of God in history. how God had rescued his people from Egypt, how the sea had parted, how mountains trembled before him, how the earth shook when he revealed his power. Habakkuk prayed, "Revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make it known. In wrath remember mercy." Even as judgment approached, Habakkuk pleaded for mercy, because the prophet knew something important. God is not only a God of justice, he is also a God of compassion. Then Habakkuk began to describe a vision of God moving through the earth. God came from Tongue, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens. The earth was filled with his praise. Light flashed from his hands. Power radiated from his presence. Before him marched pestilence. Behind him followed plague. Mountains shattered. Hills collapsed. The earth trembled beneath his feet. Rivers roared. The sun and moon stood still in the heavens. This was not the quiet image many imagine when they think of God. This was the God who commands creation, the God who shakes nations, the God who moves history toward his purpose. Habakkuk realized something profound. Even when events seem chaotic, God is still guiding the story. As Habakkuk saw this vision, he began to tremble. "I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound." Fear ran through his bones. His legs shook beneath him. Because Habakkuk now understood something. The coming judgment would be real. Babylon would invade. Cities would fall. The land would suffer. And yet, even with this knowledge, the prophet made a decision. Habakkuk spoke words that echo through history. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the olive crop fails, though the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pastures, though the cattle vanish from the stalls. In other words, even if everything goes wrong, even if prosperity disappears, even if survival becomes uncertain, Habakkuk says something astonishing. "Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, not because life is easy, not because circumstances are good, but because God is still God." Habakkuk continues, "I will take joy in the God of my salvation." Notice what the prophet does not say. He does not say he will rejoice in wealth. He does not say he will rejoice in safety. He does not say he will rejoice in comfort. He rejoices in God himself, because faith is not rooted in circumstances. Faith is rooted in who God is. Even when the future is uncertain, God remains faithful. Even when the world trembles, God remains sovereign. Even when darkness seems strong, light still wins in the end. Habakkuk ends his prophecy not with despair, but with worship. "The Lord God is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer. He enables me to tread on the heights." This is the transformation of the prophet. He began with questions. He began with confusion. He began wondering why God allowed injustice. But by the end of the conversation, Habakkuk had discovered something deeper. Faith is not always about receiving answers. Sometimes faith is about learning to trust God even when the answers remain hidden. And so the book closes like a song, a declaration meant to be sung, a testimony meant to be remembered. Because the message of Habakkuk is timeless. When the world seems unjust, when evil appears strong, when God seems silent, remember this truth. The righteous shall live by faith.